Remuneration. The Bible calls this casting your bread upon the waters. We have too many people, especially young people in agricultural classes, who are more interested in the retirement plan than in getting involved in agriculture to help someone meet a need. We have too much selfishness and not enough service. If they would spend their time helping a farmer instead of driving their car, watching videos and complaining about the lack of opportunities, they would have opportunities galore. Believe me, few people get a farm dumped into their lap. If a dream is worthwhile, it is worth some sacrifice, and that starts with little things before progressing to bigger things. And it starts with you, not the other guy. Too many people want to get the bigger thing before they've proven faithfulness in the little things. The main hurdle to realizing the full benefits of this pastured poultry opportunity is not the work, the marketing, the processing, or any other facet of the enterprise. It is getting, producing, and processing the first chicken. In short, the biggest hurdle is inertia. Once you conquer that, you're off and running. The point of this discussion is to encourage you to start small, to start with something, and to realize how little capital and time is required to raise a few chickens. It really is not that complicated. Go for it. Chapter 6, Choosing a Breed. As with all species, different breeds contribute certain assets and liabilities. A strong point in one breed will be offset by a weak point in another area. Chickens are no different. The old standard American varieties like Rhode Island Reds, White Rocks, and New Hampshire Reds are called dual-purpose breeds. They lay fairly well and yet are deep-bodied and yield a fairly meaty carcass. But modern genetic selection, especially with the onset of the vertically integrated broiler and egg industries, has further specialized breeds and even strains within breeds, so that virtually no commercial flocks now consist of the old dual-purpose breeds. Hatcheries have hyped up the old breeds, especially the Rhode Island Red. Perhaps the most popular into a strain called the Production Red, which is a better layer but a smaller bodied bird. The White Leghorn is undoubtedly the queen of the commercial egg industry, weighing hardly 3 pounds as an adult and laying more than 300 eggs in a year. On the meat end, the reigning king is the Cornish cross. When this hybrid was being developed, it was a cross of the naturally double-breasted Cornwall chicken from England and the tall-standing White Rock. The White Rock gave skeletal height and frame to the short, squatty Cornish chicken. Virtually all the broilers in America are Cornish cross. This hybrid constantly being genetically upgraded by the commercial industry to gain faster and convert grain to meat more efficiently is not without problems. Bred up to perform at a totally unnatural gain rate, this bird is prone to all sorts of diseases and structural deformities, and is in all ways an extremely fragile bird. I call these race car chickens. When everything is adjusted just right, they are awesome, but it doesn't take much to throw things out of adjustment and throw the car into a pit stop. When these birds are doing well, their performance is unparalleled. The old non-hybrid varieties are hardy and mortality runs close to zero. The reason they are not used is because they grow much more slowly and their breasts are not broad, but rather sharp and thin. As a result, the meat is not nearly as palatable, because to get a 4-pound carcass, these birds must be about 12 weeks old as opposed to 7 or 8 weeks on a Cornish cross. The older the bird, the tougher the meat. When it takes longer to produce a marketable carcass, palatability goes down. This difference in the meat is a geometric progression, meaning that each succeeding week beyond a certain age has a greater effect on meat quality. I hate to say quality because the older the meat, the more complex the amino acids, and therefore the more nutritious it is. But in terms of melting your mouth consistency, the meat deteriorates rapidly beyond the 9th week of production. The industry continues striving for earlier and earlier processing weights and ages, which militates against nutrition. Of course, if everyone cooked their meat in a crock pot, this whole argument would be unnecessary. That is a way to make even tough meat tender long, slow cooking. But that is not the way the average American cooks meat. Market acceptance, therefore, puts us on the teeter-totter, balancing young and tender on one end and the best nutrition on the other. Perhaps one of the biggest reasons to use the Cornish cross is marketability. The American consumer has grown accustomed to the double breast and the overly meaty carcass. The appearance of alternative razor-breasted carcass is hard to accept. Certainly, some consumers will buy the tougher, narrow-breasted types, but the market niche is too small for the small-scale producer to make a living at raising poultry. Of course, consumers can be educated to the merits of smaller, narrow-breasted birds if you mount an aggressive teaching campaign. This would include raising a few of the alternative birds on the side, giving away samples, and perhaps offering recipes and cooking instructions that would encourage a successful culinary and dining experience. A market for non-hybrid can certainly be cultivated, but it will be much more difficult to develop than the Cornish cross market. Consumer acceptance is extremely crucial in marketing. The average consumer can only be pushed so far, and for the unconventional producer, enough new ideas are being thrown at the consumer without offering the notion that chickens ought to look more like quail than butterballs. We've opted for the Cornish cross and have chosen to fight the deficiencies nutritionally and with good management. For feed conversion and quick cash turnaround, it is unprecedented. Consumer acceptance is tremendous, and processing is much easier because their hair has been bred off these birds and they do not require singing after feather pecking. The white pin feathers are not as easily seen as are colored pin feathers. They are also the most available of all the breeds, since virtually every hatchery has them. Genetically, they are more consistent than other variety, from hatchery to hatchery. Purchase your chickens from a hatchery that seems honest and one that gives the most consistently hardy chicks. Hatcheries are scattered all over the country. I've used several over the years and have found more differences in postal connections than in the quality of the birds. I think most hatcheries deliver an acceptable product. I suggest you try several and patronize the one that has the best postal connections and the highest quality chicks. Chapter 7. The Brooder. Chicks hatched without the benefit of mother hens require careful attention because they are quite fragile. They must feel as secure and cared for as they would if their mother were there to encircle them with wings for warmth and protection. The floor space needs to be roughly 25 square feet for 100 birds up to 4 weeks of age. They can certainly be confined tighter for the first week. The area needs to be predator-proof and free of drafts. Nothing can decimate a flock of chicks faster than predators or chill coming from drafts. The final primary requirement is dryness. Chickens can't take dampness. The brooder should allow as much natural sunshine as possible, since this stimulates the pituitary gland far more than artificial light. Full spectrum light is a desirable luxury. Be sure to put skylights in the roof to encourage light and eliminate light bulbs. Translucent fiberglass panels work well for this. Day-old chicks need to have access to 90-degree heat. The entire floor area need not be the temperature, but there must be enough heated area to allow all the chicks access at one time. They will run out from under the heated portions to eat and drink, and then run under to sleep. The actual heat source can be as elaborate as thermostatically controlled units powered by electricity or natural gas, to a wood stove, to a simple heat lamp or light bulb. Generally, insulated hoods are used in the conjunction with the heat source to make it more efficient. Thermometers need to be handy to monitor floor temperature. Feed sack skirts around the hover bottom help hold in heat. The floor should be covered with dry flakes of some carbonaceous material. I prefer wood shavings from fine woodworking shops because they are always extremely dry and quite small. Many materials do not work. Hay and straw tend to mat quickly, reducing manure penetration and forming a damp, filthy layer on top. Wood chips are too big for the chickens to scratch around, therefore producing the same effect as hay and straw. Leaves mat down and are also hard to get dry enough to absorb the moisture. The wood shavings are fine enough to afford the chicks plenty of scratching. fluffing and beak cleaning, which they do by swiping the beak on the litter, first one side then the other. A wire mesh floor should not be used because it does not let the birds scratch, fluff, or clean their beaks. It is devoid of living beneficial microorganisms that contribute much to the health of the tiny birds. We find a direct relationship between mortality and quality of the bedding. When the brooder is cleaned out between batches and new bedding put in, the mortality is higher than if it is not cleaned out but only aerated, with new material added to the top. The carbon-nitrogen ratio should be about 30-1. The quickest way to determine if the ratio is about right is through smell. If you could smell ammonia, there is not enough carbon to soak it up. Raw poultry manure is about 7-1. Cow manure, 18-1. Wood shavings, 500-1. Carbon bonds to the soluble nutrients and holds them in chemical suspension. Anytime you could smell ammonia in a livestock facility of any kind, be assured that more carbon must be added. When the animals breathe in that air, it not only harms tender respiratory mucous membranes, but pulls vitamins A and D out of the body, depositing them in the liver at toxic doses. Damaged livers are common today in the confinement poultry industry. Fecal and nitrate contamination in feeders, waters, and air particulates are escalating problems with intensive confinement housing. To show how out of balance these conventional models are, the carbon-nitrogen ratios generally run about 12-1 instead of 30-1. That is why the bedding is toxic, won't compost, and pollutes both air and water. If the carbon-nitrogen ratio is correct, the bedding will actually compost if air is injected into it. Between batches, therefore, I wet down the litter with water and then take a hoe or shovel and stir the bedding. In a big operation, this could be done with a rototiller. Remember that it will not work if the ratio is out of whack. Then I just add a couple inches of fresh wood shavings on top and put it in the chicks. We literally take out the 2 to 3 week old chicks 1 hour and put in new ones the next. No clean out, sanitizers, germicides, and the like are ever used in our facilities. The deeper the bedding, the better. The composting action is warm, which reduces the need for heat. It's an even heat too, and extremely comfortable for the chicks. We've actually raised several batches with virtually no brooder heat. We built a new brooder facility to accommodate an 18-inch bedding depth. The deep bedding grows natural antibiotics through the molds and fungi, grows a tremendous number of little bugs that offer protein for the birds, and gives off warm, moist heat very much like a mother's hen. The composting reduces the overall mass of the bedding so that when clean out is necessary, the total material is a fraction of what was originally put in. Common shrinkage is 30 to 50%. To be sure everything is correct, scoop up a handful of the bedding from deep down and make sure it smells like sweet, fertile soil or moldy leaves. It should not smell like raw manure. The brooder temperature after 48 hours can be reduced a couple of degrees per day. For 3 or 4 days, then 3 or 4 degrees per day in an accelerating curve. By the time the chicks are 3 weeks old, they can handle freezing temperatures if the air is still and dry. They are actually much stronger than most commercial producers realize. It is important to decrease their brooder temperatures early so that they will develop the hardiness necessary to survive outside on pasture. The procedure parallels hardening off greenhouse plants prior to transplanting. The birds need enough linear feeder and water or space to accommodate 35 to 50% of the flock at once. Just like babies of any other species, chicks spend the bulk of their time sleeping. It is unnecessary to have enough feeding and watering room to accommodate them all at once. It is imperative, however, to give them plenty of feeder space. When the birds line up at the feeder just after you put in fresh feed, count the chicks on the side and compute how many birds can get around the feeders. If it is not at least 35% of the total number, add more feeders. Remember that every few days this amount will change, so you need to be sensitive to the growth of the chicks and the fewer number that can get around the feeders. The reason this is so critical is that one of the easiest ways to foster leg problems is inadequate feeder space. When a chick can't get feed easily, the stress will show up in its legs. In addition, make sure the chicks never run out of feed. That is one of the worst things you could do. It is better to waste some feed than to let them run out of feed. Remember that these are high metabolizing animals. A little chick is just like a human baby in that it feeds several times throughout the day. No more than you would routinely ask a human baby to miss feedings, you should not ask chicks to miss feedings. Give them plenty of feeder space and make sure they have all they want all the time. The brooder facility needs to be tight when a cool breeze blows, but also well ventilated when the weather is hot and muggy. Host facilities use a hinged window or translucent curtains with hardware cloth behind, permanently affixed to the structure. The brooder house need not be high enough to walk in. We built some 8-foot by 10-foot brooder huts with a peaked roof made of 2 plywood panels hinged at the peak. The bottom is an 18-inch high box made of pressure-treated 1-inch by 6-inch lumber. A dirt floor is fine as long as it is adequately covered with dry shavings. If you're running more than 200 or 300 chicks, the brooder should be partitioned so that the birds can be sectioned off in groups of no more than 300. Performance in poultry always drops when the number of individuals in any one group exceeds 300.